Before it starts, I'd like to thank the Simon Fraser University, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, Dimitri Kralis for showing us around Molyvos and for the hospitality in this amazing place that Molyvos is. I'd like to thank Irini Sadia and Lauren Gilbert for organizing and coordinating this workshop and for inviting me to participate. Also, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for your respective interventions so far, and I'm looking forward to today's and tomorrow's discussion on the next steps of this workshop. You know, I'm not a representative of the collectives I'm going to talk about, and I find it very important to start with that. I always find it important to say that I've been involved in multitudes of projects, but these projects are not active anymore, and even if they are, they have their own words. Each one of the people that want to has participated in such projects can speak for themselves. And if somebody wants a collective, to have a collective discussion with the project, they should always send their questions to the projects or to the assembly or to the remaining members so they can get an answer as a whole. So I'm here as a member that has participated in projects, but I do not speak on their behalf. And I find this very important, especially since we are publishing this. So one of the first things I want to say here is that I didn't want to write about the refugee crisis, or as people refer to it. And since I've been in Goldsmiths doing my MA in research architecture and forensic architecture, many people have asked me, why don't I write about the refugee situation? They say, this is something that you spent 4 years of your life doing. Why would you go on a different field? Why would you change your perspective and scope? And I always reply that I cannot write about refugees because I'm not one. And I always find myself to think of the words of Sahram Khosravi when he says that, I don't have a quote of his, but I always resonate with the thought of how refugees or asylum seekers are sometimes the people that should write the history, in the same way that Behruz, for example, in Jeannie's paper yesterday, is the one that conveys this message to us and not volunteers or solidarity actors. And I find this very important. I want to start by setting up a timeline. And bear in mind that this timeline, this narrative is in media res. It doesn't start where the problem starts or where the situation starts. In the summer of 2015, amidst one of the most successful tourist seasons, allegedly, of the recent years, the Greek islands of Chios, Lesvos, Samos, Rhodos, Leros, and Kos, amongst other islands, bear witness to the arrival of thousands of displaced individuals from a multitude of countries of origin, mainly, in the first months, from Syria and Afghanistan. Here in Lesvos, in the north coast of the island, refugees would land in the ports of Petra, Molyvos, and Skalasi Kamnias, respectively. Before they would continue their journey towards the city of Mytilene, where they would get their registration papers that would allow them to travel in the mainland of the country and then cross the Balkans through what was then called the Balkan route. There was only a handful of collectives assisting migrants in these days, or even hours, between their arrival and their departure from the island. Yet, as the number of arrivals started to rise, the time of queuing up, the need for resources, and the need for forefront reception structures grew respectively. Meanwhile, the first hundreds of newcomers would arrive in Athens, in the port of Piraeus, the same port, as we heard, where thousands of Asia Minor refugees would arrive post the destruction or catastrophe of Smyrna in 1922. The Greek state implemented, and many would say, very aggressive policy of non-intervention for the first months of this reality, of this event, or of this process. Years since the first time I refused to comfort myself by calling this situation a crisis, let alone a refugee crisis, I found myself in dialogue with Janet Reuteman's book Anti-Crisis, and in her own words, when speaking about this work, she says, "What I have found is that crisis is not simply a way of naming events. It's a conceptual distinction or observation that generates meaning. Once we call a problem a crisis, we begin to engage in a series of logically interconnected steps that unleashes a characteristic pattern of reasoning. The pattern is familiar and it can be comforting, but it is neither original nor is it innovative." Thus the term displaced, and that's how I call this a displacement crisis. There are two aspects in this. The one is why, displaced follows a different discourse than refugee or migrant, because displaced is not, in many ways in the Greek state, and please Eleni can talk about that and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not legally it's not a legal term in Greece right now. Like we use refugee and migrant more than we use displaced. Also, displacement for me talks to other communities and other individuals that are displaced not necessarily because of war. They might be displaced because of poverty, impoverization, precarity. They can be displaced because of their sexuality. They can be displaced because of their sexual orientation and because of how they perform or express their genders. Now, it also plays against the main argument of the far right in Europe, both in Europe and in Greece, which is that, to put it in a very simple terms, you haven't been doing anything about the Greek population, which is something that all solidarity actors are hearing. And that goes respectively also, I guess, in the US and in many other countries. Like the solidarity actors are many times being confronted by this argument. And thus, when we frame our solidarity and our actions in the context of displacement and not in the context of refugia, we can also look easier into homeless populations. We can look into precarious local or foreign populations without having to define somebody through the legal route, through the legal way that the state defines them. Now, this presentation had to be edited during these last days we had all shared here, since the trip to Skala Sikaminias, as we heard on the logistical introduction by Sadia, has been added. And it was, in my head in the beginning, a presentation that would include video and imagery. But it seems that we're going to be able to have a more, let's say, multi-sensory experience once we get there. And to be honest, thinking about it, I'm really glad that I have only words to share with you today and not imagery, because I think that in many ways, each one of us has been bombarded in the last years. And again, thinking back into the whole imagery of the crisis and how this was, assembled throughout the years in this large archive of media and news representation of what the crisis is. So I will attempt this ethnography of the reception spaces and not of the border, because this is a border that I have seen, but I haven't touched. So I'm going to speak for the reception spaces, which I was a part of, and I feel way more connected to. Small anecdote about this place, because I feel that everybody tries to, like people that haven't been in Molyvos before, needs to have a sense of grounding, where we are. And I feel that Molyvos, as shown through the previous interventions, we have managed to get a sense of what Molyvos is, but I'd like to give a sense of what this room is specifically. So I haven't looked into the history of this room in terms of like what about the building and when it was built. What I know and what I remember very well is the first time I've been in this room in November 2015. I think it was the 19th of November 2015, if I'm not mistaken. Now, it was quite interesting because where Chris is sitting right now, hey Chris, there was the Lithuanian Commissioner of the European Union for Health Matters, if I'm not mistaken. And this was the very table that on every Monday, there was the weekly meeting coordination of the NGOs of the island operating in the north of the island under the chairing of the UNHCR, with the presence of a representative of the town hall of Molyvos, trying, to put it in layman terms, coordinate us and make sure that we do what they want us to do. And so Platanos, which I'm going to talk about, but in a very brief sense, was an anti-fascist and anti-authoritarian collective of activists from many places, with many religions or non-religions, from many races or non-races. Each one of us had a different backgrounds in any way. We weren't present in this meeting. We didn't want to come to this meeting because we always thought that we don't want to get involved in this process of monitoring our actions, which was why we didn't set up an NGO as well. Now, we got notified that the European Commissioner would be here, and we were invited by a friend who lives in the island to join the discussion. So Platanos' intervention wasn't that important in the beginning, but what happened was that at a certain time, these local friends, which I'm sure many people in Molyvos know, and I won't name as I think, but I've made the picture enough for people to know, asked the European Commissioner, why is the European Commission attending this table? While at the same time, Frontex operates in these waters. It's like, so what is that you're doing here? And the European Commissioner replied that the EU is looking for concrete evidence, and I quote, concrete evidence that there is a problem in Lesvos. And that was November 2015, not July, not June. That was way after Sadia was helping Melinda down in the ports. That was way after Platanos was set up in the 1st of October. That was way after Moria has been set up as this concentration camp that it is. And that was way after the first people arrived and already left from Athens to the Balkan route and then to Germany. So the common, let's say, reply that was given to the EU Commissioner, and thus concluding this small anecdote, was that we have an unlimited amount of video footage, audio recordings, and pictures that we can definitely send anytime they want to the European Commission's office, and we don't really find a reason for them to be here. So I'm going to go through what Platanos was, and I'm going to make, as I told you, it's going to be in media res, and I'm going to go a bit back and go into Athens. So while Sadia was here and while many other people started arriving in the shores of Lesvos from both sides, like either from Athens or through Athens as tourists, or from Turkey as displaced individuals with the boats we all know from the media, there was a need that we saw in Athens, because the first people started arriving in Athens, and that's where it plays into the financial crisis and the austerity, because what many people are not aware of is that many people had to stay in Athens, many refugees had to stay in Athens for more than a week because of capital controls, which is for us, which is something that we didn't realize in the beginning. We were like, okay, you arrived here, why are you not leaving? Why are you not taking the Balkan route? And then we realized that they couldn't go because they couldn't retrieve enough money from the banks or from the money exchange offices so they could continue. That led to people being in Piraeus and then diffused around the city of Athens till they could find a smuggler. Now, the whole discussion about who is a smuggler, who's a trafficker, trafficking and smuggling in general is a discussion I'm not going to be able to expand in here because I think it's a whole separate presentation and I don't find, but I just make this remark because I think it's important for discussions that can follow after, especially if we're going to see Platanos and the port. So there was the first crisis, let's say. There was the lack of services. There was a lack of the Greeks, the lack from the side of the Greek state to say we need to step up and do something. Either negative, either positive. There wasn't even detention, which was very strange for the Greek state. Because the Greek state tends to be quite aggressive, but by action. And suddenly it was aggressive, as I said in the beginning, by non-intervention, which was a new thing for us as well as activists, being part of the leftist spectrum of politics in Greece. So the other thing that is very important to know, and since we are in a tourist vacation, is that many times what we call the movement or the choros, the space, of left's politics in Athens is usually on vacation in summer, which is very true because people work all year and it's a working class movement. So obviously many people want to just go away. And suddenly we found ourselves in this very peculiar situation. And again, making a remark. When I say we, I mean each one of us separately. Okay, I'm not representing the group's thought necessarily. I speak of the timeline. And we said, okay, we have to do something, but who's the we? Because most of the we are on vacation. So we cannot really set up an anarchist, and, take the red and black flag and go around Athens and say, sorry, do you have 5 minutes to talk to you about refugees? That couldn't work. And suddenly we thought that maybe we shouldn't get to be so specific. Specifically, the three people that started, and I'm not one of them, the three people that started the first assembly, which was called the Self-Organized Initiative of Solidarity with the Refugees of Pedion Tuareos being a park which has a quite violent nature in terms that it's one of the main places in Athens for addicts and for sex working, illegal sex working in Athens. So the first people arrived there and set up tents there or tried to accommodate themselves, just by occupying in a way this public space. So the first assembly that was called was for people to join and gather and provide some sort of, not services, but support to the people that were camped in this small park. So this first self-organized initiative of solidarity with the refugees in Phevos Kororos, which I promise I won't repeat as a name, but so as of now, this first initiative, decided that instead of putting a very, very strict political framework to frame our actions, would base their actions in the three main, let's say, perspectives of anti-racism, anti-fascism, and anti-sexism. And that was it. That was the consensus line, and that was how this structure would operate. And it was a very successful structure. And very briefly saying that we supported this occupation of public space. We actually helped setting up a medical center, a food distribution center, in coordination with another very long-existing structure in Athens, which is called Network for the Political and Social Rights of Migrants, or Steki Metanaston, which was kind enough to offer all the structure and participate actively in the initiative. And all that was run for about a month. Now, one of the interesting things about this is how it was closed, which is part of the narrative that is not really present in the main discourse about refugees and solidarity in Greece. Many people think that these structures usually close because there is either not any more refugees to be accommodated or to be serviced and supported, or because the Greek state cracks down on the initiative. This is a very specific initiative alongside Platanos, because the state didn't crack down on the initiative, because there was such a lack of provision from the state side that the state actually invited people to run the newly founded state structure that was opened at the time. It was the first refugee camp in Athens for the new, let's say, for the recent crisis, which was Eleonas refugee camp. So then, instead of evicting the people from Phevos Kororos, forcefully taking them into buses and moving them by force to Eleonas, what actually happened was that the state contacted the Solidarity Initiative, asked us to move the refugees to Eleonas, and asked to work for the state and the structure there. It was actually quite interesting when they failed to understand that there was no coordinator, like in terms of leader. Like somebody's like, "So who's your supervisor?" I was like, Kostas, Eleni, or whoever. We don't care. Like, you can talk to any of us. So that was the thing, that there was a decision for the structure to cease its operations after we had a discussion with the people residing in the place. And there was a common decision that yes, all of them that would want to should move to Eleonas, because they would be provided with a better, maybe more set up structure than we could offer. Also because we were relying completely on private donations and on personal initiative and collective initiative instead of sources from the state. Now, moving on to Platanos, and that's the interconnection there. One of the things is that by the time the Phevos Kororos was finished, we ended up having loads of material, physical material, and some money. And we started contacting many other places in Greece that had, structures such as ours, or let's say small NGO initiatives or private initiatives that would support refugees. And we started calling them because they had sent us resources before. So we were like returning kind of the offer and say, would you like us to send you clothes? Would you like us to send you food? And then we had, there was a discussion between our coordinator at the time and Giorgos Tyrikos Ergas. Giorgos Tyrikos Ergas is a local here in Lesvos. He's, I think he would describe himself firstly as a human, as a thinker, as a philosopher of sorts, I would say, and definitely as a fisherman. And he has his own business in Kaloni. So Yorgos, alongside Papastratis, which is a kind of a big figure of the, and we can get into who Papastratis was later on in the discussion. So Yorgos was the main coordinator of an NGO, a small NGO called Agalya, which means hug. Agalya has been the main supporter of migrants in Lesvos for many years. Though, as he says, that was usually happening in their own terms, like in a more slow-paced way, so they wouldn't have to deal with such an emergency. And before I'm getting into, I'm trying to find here because I have a quote from him, and I'm really sorry that I cannot find it right now. What? So I'm really sorry. Yeah, I was supposed to have that printed, but I didn't. So anyway, so Yorgos called and said that, we don't need resources and we don't need money because Papastratis, who was this priest, the founder of this NGO, had recently died. And Papastratis was not in good terms, let's say, with the local metropolis of Mytilene, thus didn't want the support of the church. And he had asked people to donate to Agalya if and when he would die. So we get a call from Agalya which says that we don't need your money because we have, please give them to somebody else. We don't need resources because we have a full storage unit. What we need is people that have certain amounts of experience in this and would not come here as tourists, because the biggest problem that they had at the time was they would get tourists that would want to help them, but at the same time the tourists would faint. And I still remember Yorgos was explaining to us how refugees would walk up to tourists and give them water instead of the opposite. Because you have to understand here that many of the people that arrived, despite this very times morbid and grim imagery of people shouting, most of the times people here were very, very happy to arrive and actually in cheered and in good health. Because of course there were wrecks, and there are many, many people that have died based on the policy of the European Union in these waters, but that doesn't mean that everybody that arrived here was crying and shouting. So many people arrived here they were happy. And that's one of the things that also got us going in terms of, despite the death, you can always think of the thousands and the millions of people that survived the crossing. So that's how Platanos came into existence. Platanos was actually 10 people and then 100 more. The first team was 10 people that arrived here on the 1st of October in Skala Sikaminas. Actually, not in Skala Sikaminas even, we arrived in Skala Kalonis, which is the seaside of Kaloni, where Yorgos introduced us to the island having a map, which was very, very simple. Like his whole narrative was, simple as it can be. It's like, okay, this is the map. People arrive in this place here, and he showed us the north coast. This is covered, and he meant Molyvos, and he meant Melinda and the rest of the volunteers and the structures here. This is where the Spanish lifeguards are, and that was in the middle, which it's a place we are going to see while going with a boat. That was the middle of the shoreline. This is empty. That's where you go. I was like, okay, what do we need to do? Do your thing. We cover the expenses. So no need to wear a jacket, no need to wear any type of pin, no need to advertise anything. It was like, just do your thing. If there's a problem with the police, try to keep me out of it if possible. It was like, maybe call me first before you do something that is illegal, greatly, apart from occupying a public space and doing, search and rescue without informing the authorities. But apart from that, you're free to go. And Platanos was a place that was operating for almost 6 months in full time, providing exactly that. Search and rescue. There was a boat that arrived from Athens with our own captain, his name is Iasonas Apostolopoulos, who is currently in search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean, still active. And I would like also to send greetings to him through this. And concluding in terms of the Platanos story, I'd say that it was again based in the same structure, providing medical care, providing food, warm food and cold food, and providing mainly and filling the gap, this small gap, the same way that Platanos feels and Pedion to Aros fill the gap between the start, let's say, of the incoming flows of people and the official state intervention. The same way Platanos wanted to fill this gap between the arrival of these people in the islands and their registration. Concluding all this, looking forward to Elena's intervention, I'd like to send comradely and warm greetings of solidarity and support to the members of search and rescue missions, currently attempting to operate in the Mediterranean, opposing the deadly modus operandi of Fortress Europe, and more specifically, Captain Pia Klemp, which I haven't met, but I know that he's the Sea Watch 3 vessel captain, who is currently facing charges alongside numerous other activists and lifeguards of aiding illegal immigration. I'd like, given the opportunity, to greet once again locals and foreigners that reside in these places of reception, in these places of potential inclusion, for I know that their work has been essential for both the displaced and transiting communities, and the local ones, and that their interventions were and still are timely, and that they also come at a great cost. Now, I could go on and speak a lot about the structure and give more details, but I wouldn't want that because I prefer to keep on to go on with Elena's intervention, and then we can come all together and get more specific, because I would get into a rundown of very, very specific logistics, which I find really important, but at the same time, I think they can come at a later time. Now, in terms of some research questions that I would like to have, because as you can tell, this is an experiment. This is me coming from an activist background with no academic and scholar background at all, trying to not theorize fully what has happened, because I don't feel that this is important right now, but like how we can actually interconnect the two and how one can learn from the other. Now, thinking of all these presentations we already had, I would like to contemplate on whether Greece and Lesvos and the rest of the islands of the North Aegean are merely victims of their geography. Are they, as the public discourse claims them to be? And based on my title, why Receptionscapes? What connects these solidarity projects, apart from the common actors? And because there are some common actors and some common networks, is it the similar territorialities and means of organizing an action? How could we, as activists and as scholars, focus not in the reactionary politics, but instead investigate the dynamics that would allow for this politics of possibility, for the creation of this alternative way for managing resources and including individuals and communities in our societies? Could networks of solidarity be created and sustained long-term in a transnational level, including actors from all fields? And I have here to say something about a discussion we had with Sadia since we met, which is, I might have not been reflecting upon the conflicts that arise between the local and transiting communities, name it refugees or not. But they have opened up a space which allows for the possibility to counter the current politics of migration in both the external and the internal borders of the EU. And thinking of Gary's presentation, what is the possibility that opens up from these ruptures of non-history or forced history in certain places and communities? I'll leave you to it with the end of with some words from Meleagros, a cynical philosopher and poet born in Jordan, in a Macedonian settlement which was called Gadara, and please, Ari, correct me, I think Kais in Arabic. I don't know if that's the correct way to pronounce it. Huh? Good. He was born in 130 BC and he lived most of his life in Tyros, an ancient city in the coastline of Lebanon, until he moved to the Greek island of Kos, also another place where there is a refugee camp right now, where he died in 60 BC. I'll read an English translation and then I'll also read and I'll leave you with the original. The English translation writes, "And if I'm Syrian, what's the peculiarity? One fatherland we share, stranger, the cosmos. Chaos gave birth to all of us." And in ancient Greek, "Είδε Σύρος τι το θαύμα, μίαν ξένε, πατρίδα κόσμων νέομεν, εν θνατούς πάντα έτικτε χάος." Thanks for listening.